The seasons may have shifted from winter to spring, but the reality of seasonal flooding is already confronting Iowans from border to border. We get a threat assessment from Iowa experts on this edition of Iowa Press.
Funding for Iowa Press was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation, the Associated General Contractors of Iowa, the public's partner in building Iowa's highway, bridge, and municipal utility infrastructure.
I'm a dad.
I am a mom.
I'm a kid.
I'm a kid at heart. I'm a banker.
I'm an Iowa banker.
No matter who you are, there is an Iowa banker who is ready to help you get where you want to go. Iowa Bankers, allowing you to discover the genuine difference of Iowa banks.
For decades, Iowa Press has brought you politicians and newsmakers from across Iowa and beyond. Now celebrating more than 40 years of broadcast excellence on statewide Iowa Public Television. This is the Friday, March 22 edition of Iowa Press. Here is David Yepsen.
As winter was winding down on the upper Midwest, nearly 2 months worth of snowpack combined with heavy rain to supercharge seasonal flooding in Nebraska and Iowa. On the western edge of our state, the Missouri River has crested over flood protections and compromised multiple levee systems to spread across the entire valley. Small towns, farms, and infrastructure have been decimated by the high water. In southwest Iowa communities like Hamburg, it's all too familiar sight for those who witnessed similar flooding in 2011 and for Iowans in the rest of the state who remember 1993, 2008, and 2010. And now are bracing for what comes in 2019. Here to discuss the situation and future flooding concerns are Joyce Flinn, Director of the Iowa Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, and Justin Glisan, the state climatologist here in Iowa. Well, thank you both for taking time out of what is obviously a very busy time for both of you to be with us here today. Thank you.
Welcome.
Glad to be here.
Across the table are Iowa reporters Erin Murphy, Des Moines Bureau Chief of Lee Enterprises, and Kay Henderson is News Director for Radio Iowa.
Director Flinn, the governor on Friday morning released a damage assessment for western Iowa. Seems like a lot of money. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Absolutely. What we do is look at, from the various federal programs available, what the potential impact may be to those programs. And as you saw, the public infrastructure damages totaled approximately $77 million. Those are initial estimates. We contacted our county emergency managers excuse me, on Tuesday afternoon around 4 o'clock and said, we need to have these damages by noon on Thursday. So they made a Herculean effort to gather the information, working with our local public works partners, and got that information to us yesterday so we can compile all of that and get it in this letter.
But a total, it seemed nearly $6 billion.
1.5 billion, yes.
And that includes the damage to grain and to farms and other infrastructure that's owned privately.
Correct. We went down the list and we know there's a huge agriculture impact, so we included that number. We had gotten an estimate from Fremont County of $107 million, so we basically doubled that, figuring that Mills County had similar impacts. I mentioned the public assistance. We then looked at businesses, and we used a lot of GIS data, floodplain levels, all of those scientific ways of looking at that damage, and included all of that. We also looked at the miles of levee, both core levees and non-core levees, and attached a estimated figure to repair all of those. So that's how the 1.5 is comprised.
Mr. Glisan, David mentioned the floods of not too long ago. How does this, what you're seeing now, how does this compare to what we saw in 2011?
So if you look at the setup that we've had over the past week or so, 2018 was the second wettest year on record, 1993 being the first wettest. We had the third wettest autumn and the third wettest winter. Combined with that, we had subsurface moisture at the 99th percentile. So if you think of a sponge, the sponge is soaked. The ground was also frozen. So with record snowfall in February, we had anywhere from 3 to 5 inches of melt plus precipitation running off into our river systems. So at some parts along the river system, especially in western Iowa, we've had record flooding.
And you have federal projections that are forecasting this could actually be a season worse than 1993, 2011. How bad could this get? What should we be preparing for?
The probabilities are out there. What we're most interested in now is the record snowpack across the Dakotas and in Minnesota. What we would like to see is a gentle melting cycle. So the 40-20 rule, typically have highs in the 40s, lows in the 20s. So we get melt and refreeze gently, so we have runoff into the streams that the streams can handle. Otherwise, if we get into a regime with active precipitation patterns, we could be in a very bad position.
Well, what are your probabilities of getting into a really bad situation? What's likelihood?
So
he mentioned the federal officials are saying it could be bad.
Sure. So if you look at the climate outlooks that we have short-term outlooks, 6 to 10, 8 to 14 day, and then we go out to monthly and seasonally. Our monthly outlook for April has us below average temperature-wise, but a tad bit above precipitation-wise. Now, that doesn't suggest that we're going to get into an active pattern where we have rainfall that we could see major flooding occurring. Looking out seasonally, our trends are also showing above average chances of precipitation. So that snowpack melting north of us will really give us an indication of where we're moving.
Director Flinn, one thing I hear from Southwest Iowans in that flood zone is they didn't have enough advance warning. In 2011, many of the farmers got as many semis on the farm and they unloaded grain and got it to higher ground. Was there sort of a breakdown in the early warning system here?
I don't think that it was a breakdown in the warning system. I think there were so many variables that it caused a lot of problems with those warning systems. Once one levee breaks, that causes cascading impacts. And a lot of this water, too, was from the Platte River, which at times we heard was putting out 200,000 cubic foot per second, and that's unrestrained flow. So all those factors together just made it really hard to provide good forecasting at some point because of those unrestricted flows.
Mr. Glisan, how do people forecast flooding?
Again, you look at a variety of variables. Moving into spring, we always expect some sort of flooding because of snowpack. This year we had record percentiles, as I said, of subsoil moisture. So any type of runoff that we would get from melting snow or precipitation just runs off. It won't soak in.
But we get, there's going to be a tornado, maybe. There is a tornado. Take cover. When can Iowans expect to get that sort of warning about flooding?
If you look at the situation that we're in right now, it was the perfect storm. We had the bomb cyclone that moved out of the Colorado region into Nebraska, Iowa. Luckily, we were on the warm and drier side of that. But you had anywhere from 4 to 8 inches of snowfall across Iowa. You dump between a ½ inch to 1 inch of water on top of that, you're getting 3 to 5 inches of runoff within 36 hours. Combine that with above average temperatures over 36 hours, you get rapid melting. Those types of things are hard to forecast.
Director Flinn, a lot of people in western Iowa are critical of the Army Corps of Engineers' management of the Gavins Point Dam in South Dakota. What's your feeling about that?
Again, I would just say on this one, 2011, I think they admit there were some failures there because they didn't manage the system properly. But this year, as I mentioned, with the unrestrained flows and everything, they only went to 100,000 cubic foot per second for 1 6-hour time frame. Otherwise, they were very much trying to control and regulate. But when you have all those other inflows from inland rivers and there's no way to stop that flow, it was the perfect storm.
The New York Times today has a front page story about the Gavins Point Dam, and it ought to be required reading for anybody in Iowa. But in that story, John Bemis, the man who handles the management of the Gavins Point Dam, said exactly that it was a perfect storm. In addition to everything you've mentioned, there was a dam that broke in Spencer, Nebraska, I believe, and he said he was actually worried about losing the Gavins Point Dam. How do we get better warnings like that so that the manager of the gates is not faced with a decision like that?
Yeah, and that's a really tough question. And we were hearing things of some of their gates were frozen because of the extreme winter we'd had. So that made it doubly hard for them to control things. But it's a good question on how do we fix some of those things. It's a very costly infrastructure too.
Mr. Glisan, what do you say to that? How do we get better information to the people that control the floodgates so that they can, as Kay mentioned, give better warnings, but also not be in a situation like this, which was a perfect storm?
And if you look at the perfect storm, the cyclone, we had not seen a low pressure system of that strength in the 60 years. So the rapidity at which the dominoes started falling, the forecast models can't pick that up fast enough. And getting that information to stakeholders, in my position, I give observations to state stakeholders, and they produce the policies. But again, there was the rapidity of events that it can impede these kind of things.
What would Western Iowa look like if we were to lose the Gavins Point Dam?
I wouldn't even venture a guess. I'm not a hydrologist, but it would be catastrophic.
Mr. Glisan, we've hearing these terms, 100-year floods, but numerous times here in the past decade, 20, 30 years. Why is that happening with more frequency lately? You're a scientist. What does the science tell you about what's going on here? Are we just rolling snake eyes over and over, or is there something happening here?
That's a good question. You look at, we have 147 years of temperature and precipitation records for the state. The trend shows us warming, and with a warmer atmosphere, a warmer surface temperature, we're able to hold more water vapor in the atmosphere. That gives us a higher probability of having more precipitation events. What we're seeing over the past 30 years is that the intensity of precipitation events is increasing. And we're also seeing them lock into specific parts of the Midwest and even over Iowa. So when you're shifting the probability of having less intense, gentle rainfalls towards more intense rainfall events like the Ankeny June 30th event of last year, you're getting rainfall rates in which infrastructure can't keep up.
So are those terms outdated? Should we not be using terms like 100-year flood anymore? Is this the new normal?
Those are more for the hydrologists and statisticians to propose, but yes, we are moving into a new type of precipitation regime.
Director Flinn, if we're moving into a new type of weather system, should municipalities out there who maintain a drinking water supply be building the kind of big old berm that they have built around the Des Moines waterworks to prevent flooding? Should, now that we know that, you know, all that snow in Minnesota is going to come down the river, should communities, particularly along those river basins, be preparing to protect their water supply?
I believe they should, and we are in touch with a lot of the communities across the state because, as we've discussed, we're focused on the Missouri River right now, but there are a lot of the interior rivers that are high as well, and there's a potential for flooding on the Mississippi. So we're reaching out to those folks. Many of them are taking those proactive measures because when you lose a water system, that's hard to recover from quickly.
Mr. Glisan, you work in the Iowa Department of Agriculture. What should farmers in eastern Iowa who aren't seeing the devastation that they're seeing in southwest Iowa but could encounter it at any moment, what should they do? What sort of plans should they make for equipment lost in southwest Iowa, grain lost?
Well, we did see a lot of grain loss in western Iowa because of the fast nature of the events. So farmers can take that guidance and put that into action in eastern Iowa. We also need to look seasonally at what we can do. Cover crops is a good thing. When you get percentiles of moisture in the subsoil, cover crops act to lock the soil in so we don't get into runoff if we do get into flooding events or higher intensity precipitation events. Also, these watershed areas that we're building that can take excess runoff from these higher intensity events, those are also good things that farmers can put in.
So what's the cheapest cover crop if I'm a farmer? Do I plant radishes? What sort of things can I plant on corn and soybean ground that has been harvested?
So like rye.
Director Flinn, I want to go back to Kay's question for a minute in terms of what can communities do, People watching this program, or a lot of them are community leaders. Give me a checklist. You mentioned maybe hardening the asset around your water supply. What are other things that people in communities should be doing now to protect against these perfect storms that are being predicted here?
Sure. I think one of the first things you want to do is prepare your citizens. So they're thinking about making sure they've got a warning app on their phone, making sure they know where they're going to go, what they're going to do. The other thing is looking at your critical infrastructure and having a plan for how to protect that. We have a lot of resources pre-positioned throughout the state. A lot of them are pumps that are in areas that commonly flood, so those can be moved quickly to alleviate some minor flooding. But just looking at and knowing what your risks are right now and then taking any measures you can to protect them.
Mr. Glisan, bottomland that flooded is bottomland for a reason. It is in a river bottom. If you're a farmer there, don't you inherently have some risk of losing crops on occasion, that this is just part of the danger of living where you do?
Sure. And again, I deal with numbers and observations, but yes, seasonally what we're seeing is in the spring, the precipitation is increasing and it's becoming earlier in the season. Summer, we're getting less precipitation when the crops need them the most, especially livestock. Then you get into fall, we're seeing an increase in fall precipitation. So the growing window is also shrinking. So the bottomlands that you talk about, they're the first effectively basin where that water flows to. So,
and Director Flinn, what about, are you worried about there being really an exodus from low-lying communities and farmlands after you've been hit several times? I mean, aren't people getting a message that it's time to move to higher ground?
I think absolutely that's a concern, and that was expressed when I was with the governor in both Hamburg and some of the other lower-lying communities. They want to hang on to their homes, it's their home, but they also realize that, you know, they're having to do something different or they're facing these continual impacts.
Mr. Glisan, you talked about a shortened growing season. You talked about difficulties people have actually harvesting a crop because it's so wet. Does this mean that farmers have to choose different seeds and different inputs given a changing growing season, or is this just a blip and things will go back to normal? Or what's your advice to farmers who have to buy things now to plant for this coming season?
well, as we know, Iowa farmers are the most resilient farmers on earth. So whether it's hot, cold, wet, or dry, they always find a way to get planted and to harvest. That being said, we do these Outlook products that we put out seasonally. They can be used as guidance for where to plant, what types of hybridization to plant, things of that nature. So yes, we do put out products that are targeted towards agriculture since we are an agricultural state.
So for the city folk who are watching, you buy a different kind of seed that matures at a different rate.
Right.
Director Flinn, speaking of things that communities and farmers can do to try to mitigate these things, the people of Hamburg took some steps after 2011 with their levy, and then federal regulators came in and said that they had to scale those efforts back. What is the message to the people there who tried to do something, were trying to be proactive, and I guess government red tape, for lack of a better word, got in their way?
Yeah, that's a tough one because that was mentioned multiple times, and that's something the governor wants to look at too, is those red tape regulations that are impacting the abilities of communities once they build that structure to maintain that structure and not have this happen again.
Do we need new codes for infrastructure looking ahead to trying to prevent the next thing from happening, to strengthen our bridges and levees and things like that, as we're repairing and building things, trying to prepare for the next event like this? Does the state and/or federal government need to look at codes and what's needed to brace for those events?
I've heard a lot of discussion around design build, and I think a lot of people are having those same thoughts, and what do we need to do so that we're rebuilding better and stronger than we have right now.
Mr. Glisan, as you observe, you don't delve into policy, but you observe the data. Would you make a recommendation that something like that needs to be addressed?
The data point I look at is the Ankeny event in 2018. I live in Beaverdale. That infrastructure was built in the 20s. The sewers have been updated, but when we're moving into what the trends are showing us of higher intensity events more often, it's, I think, a no-brainer that these types of infrastructure ideas need to be looked at, yes. And those are the numbers are telling us that.
In regards to the bottomland that David mentioned, that probably won't be farmed in this growing season. Do you expect people to get back even next year?
That's a tough question. It depends on the amount of dryness that we get moving into summer, into fall. A lot of those bottomlands are covered in sand, so the topsoil's gone. So that'll have an impact on regenerating soil nutrients, all that kind of agricultural information that we need to get out. So yes, it could be a long time before that land is farmed again.
If farmers who got hit in 2011 and have hardly climbed up the financial hill again have to go bankrupt, should policymakers consider moratoriums on bankruptcies? I mean, how do you help the farmers in that zone to be able to go back in 2020 to farm if they go out of business in 2019?
There's a lot of concern on that because, as you know, Iowa is heavily agricultural state, and the governor is looking at all those measures she has available to her. I believe the recent one she did was sales tax filing waivers or something. So she's looking at all those. How can we assist Iowans who are impacted, and it's going to affect their livelihood?
And the governor on Friday this morning has asked for an expedited presidential declaration. Mm-hmm. What does that trigger in terms of immediate help for people who are suffering through this?
For example, the event last summer, as you know, it took months for us to get an answer on that. Nebraska received a declaration after 2 days, and we're expecting similar. So it just speeds up the time frame from when those resources are available to include financial assistance and assistance to homeowners as well.
And you're talking about the event of the tornadoes, correct?
Correct, both the tornadoes and the floods.
And Pellis. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
What about speeding up past problems that we've had, solutions to past problems? You go to Cedar Rapids, people over there are still complaining about the slow response to floods they had a decade ago. Is there any look being given to the government response to all these events and seeing what can be done to speed up the solutions?
Yeah, that's an ongoing discussion, believe me, because the federal system does not work quickly. There are a lot of regulations and requirements, so it does not move quickly. And in the case of a buyout, it's a voluntary program, but then it takes years for a buyout. So one of the things we deal with all the time is managing people's expectations on how quickly things are going to occur, because unfortunately, we at the state level don't have control over that.
The legislators are getting asked by constituents to help. What can they do? What can we've talked about some ideas here, but what specifically, and I want to ask both of you this question, what specifically can the legislature do? They're in session, they're doing their budget. Is there anything that you recommend that they can do now to help the situation?
And I don't have anything specific, but I know the governor has asked all of her staff to look at, are there building code requirements? Are there different things that the legislature, because they are in session now, could effectively take a look at right now, and then moving forward with those?
And do you have the tools you need to provide these better forecasts? You know, if we're going to get record rain, I'd like to know about it as early as possible.
Sure, we have a robust observation network across the state, both National Weather Service and a civilian rain gauge network called COCORAS. So we use this data in terms of disaster relief if it's requested by FSA offices, for example. Yes, I do have the tools that are necessary, and as the state climatologist, I give observations and data to stakeholders, policymakers, legislators, and I'm always ready, willing, and able to meet with them to discuss weather and climate.
Are we going to have more tornadoes?
So there have been studies that show that the activity of tornadic supercells that produce most tornadoes is moving further east. Now we're right along the line of where we could get more, or we might not get more. That's a flip of the coin answer, but it's very difficult to forecast tornadic activity moving into the future.
You mentioned the deluge that hit central Iowa. Remind us how many inches that was.
So anywhere from the Ankeny event.
Yeah.
So Ankeny, we had some measurements anywhere from 6 to 8 inches in 3 hours. My rain gauge in Beaverdale had 5.5 inches in 2.5 hours.
So you've seen the future casts. Should Iowans expect that kind of, even if they don't live near a river, they should be thinking about flooding?
I think we should always be proactive in terms of weather. Weather's becoming more variable. And as we see the increases in precipitation intensity and the spatial scale where it's falling across the state, we do know we're more inclined to have flooding in the future.
Director Flinn, we've got just a few seconds left. Alabama lost a lot of citizens because the early warnings weren't heard. Is our early warning system for tornadoes in good shape?
I believe it is. There are a lot of tornado sirens in communities. We provide funding for tornado sirens. The legislature funds a statewide mass notification system. So I think we've got a pretty robust system in place, and it's just getting the message out for citizens to sign up, to pay attention, and be ready to respond.
I know you're both very busy. We thank you very much for your time today. Good luck in your work.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
And thank you for joining us. We'll be back next week for another edition of Iowa Press at our regular times, 7:30 Friday night and noon on Sunday. For all of us here at Iowa Public Television, I'm David Yepsen, and thanks for joining us today.
Funding for Iowa Press was provided by Friends, the Iowa Public Television Foundation, the Associated General Contractors of Iowa, the public's partner in building Iowa's highway, bridge, and municipal utility infrastructure.
I'm a dad.
I am a mom.
I'm a kid.
I'm a kid at heart. I'm a banker.
I'm an Iowa banker.
No matter who you are, there is an Iowa banker who is ready to help you get where you want to go. Iowa Bankers, allowing you to discover the genuine difference of Iowa banks.